I'm Ian Welsh, and tonight on 60 Minutes, we will delve into the motivations behind changes in infrastructure, paralleling from the historically rooted city of Paris, most famously envisioned by Napoleon-era city planner Baron Haussmann, and the recently recovering Detroit being rebuilt from decades of economic trauma. Both cities have been overhauling areas abandoned and no longer needed, repurposing them for uses both financial and recreational. But who are these changes made for? Who are these changes made by? Tonight, on 60 Minutes, a hands-on journey through the streets of Paris, an eye-opening interview with former Detroit resident Maya Ross, and a commentary on the gentrification between two diverse cities. Both cities incorporate elements of planning specifically designed to discriminate against those of a lower socioeconomic class. Haussmann plowed the slums of Paris to the ground to make way for his new buildings, designed for a wealthier market. In this process, thousands of people were displaced from their homes for a profit. The new city was also designed without central meeting places and wider roads to make protests easier to suppress and barricades impossible to form. Detroit carries a similar theme within its city planning, though its history was rooted in racial discrimination. Predominantly African American communities were torn apart to make way for easier access into the central city areas by the construction of a major highway.
One of the most predominant examples of an urban renewal plan that had a racially biased motivation behind it was the destruction of Black Bottom via the creation of I-75. Black Bottom, a neighborhood with a large number of African American residents, was a central hub for culture and for many a place to start a new life after slavery was abolished in the 1800s. But beginning in 1944, the mayor at the time, Edward Jeffries, set a plan in place to tear down old structures around the city as a way to enact urban renewal in Detroit. Black Bottom was eventually destroyed by this renewal plan. The creation of I-75 as part of the National Highway Act of 1956 uprooted a majority of the residents and demolished most of the structures in the area. This highway allowed for new residents to enter the city without having to drive through this area with predominantly black residents, and while the government officials at the time saw this as a positive addition to the city, it completely disregarded the residents of the area and alludes to the idea that this plan was motivated by racial bias. Making a connection back to the article by Langdon Winter titled Do Artifacts Have Politics, it is interesting to consider the role of the highway during the renewal plan and its political significance. It is very clear to see that these changes were made for politicians and wealthy residents of Detroit, as the residents of Black Bottom paid extra money to move, quote-unquote, whiter areas of the city, and then the plan ignored the residents of the area that couldn't afford to relocate. This is very reminiscent to the examples we discussed during class, such as benches specifically designed to prevent homeless people from sleeping on them, and the poor evacuation plan for Hurricane Katrina set up by the government that overlooked residents who couldn't afford to leave their homes or have last-minute access to a car to leave when they lost the opportunity to take buses to leave the city.
Both Detroit and Paris are home to many theaters, restaurants, and other tourist attractions. People come from all over to partake in the vibrant culture of the city, but are they getting the full picture? Towards the central areas of the city, you can find the nicest restaurants and hotels, best public transportation, and wonderful art all over. Detroit is home to many sports arenas and theaters, such as the Fox Theater and Little Caesars Arena, where people come to see their favorite shows, concerts, or sporting events. Parking garages are full of nice cars and get to be pretty expensive the closer you get to certain venues. In Paris, it's very similar. Public transportation is more advanced technology and drops you off exactly where you need to be. The areas with the most famous attractions have the nicest and usually more expensive restaurants and hotels. Just about everything is incredibly convenient, clean, and well kept. However, you notice something as you move further out from the city center. The buildings become more run down, and the streets become dirtier and have more trash. Restaurants are usually cheaper, but with that they are typically dingier and less well kept. There's more graffiti on buildings, and many of them are abandoned. Fewer convenient methods of transportation exist, and the technology is usually not up to date. The transportation system in Paris also displays a bias toward certain groups of people, though in a more subtle way. Paris's transportation system supports millions of people commuting to, from, and through the city each day. Passengers on the metro system come from many different walks of life, including businessmen, school children, the homeless, and tourists. This metro system is in many ways reflective of where investments towards infrastructure are going. Line 1 travels through wealthy neighborhoods and popular tourist attractions and is impressively clean and well kept. Train stops are more modern, even containing works of art or little shops. The trains are completely automated, even alerting you to which stop you're at and which one is next. In contrast, other metros that pass through middle-class residential areas, such as Line 6, are not as nice. Stops are dingier, covered in litter, and sometimes have people urinating in the corridors between trains. These trains are older, with a more outdated technology, requiring a button to be pushed or lever pulled in order to open the door. Social and political implications of infrastructure are reflected in the differences between these two, as certain groups of people are more valued than others within the system.
The creation of new projects and repurposing of land can both reflect racial bias and also play into the gentrification of areas. Sometimes, these new projects can be created with positive intentions but have negative consequences for residents. In Paris, an old unused railway system in the 12th arrondissement was transformed in the late 20th century into a lovely park, the Promenade Plantée. Many people supported the project as it would get rid of a seemingly useless eyesore in the middle of the city. However, the creation of this tourist attraction led to rising rent prices that drove out residents of the area, and it also destroyed some of the street markets that existed there. Some citizens felt that this kind of supposed improvement was destroying the historical validity of the city, as well as unfairly compromising lower-class neighborhoods. Similarly, in Detroit, projects to enhance the city and deal with vacancy have had significant consequences. The creation of new businesses in the city has revived the downtown area and led to the creation of many new buildings, shops, grocery stores, and even urban farms. However, rising rents in the downtown area has driven out residents, and many areas outside of downtown are still struggling. Furthermore, new projects like the Q Line light rail promise to improve transportation in Detroit and help those working in the city. Yet, even this large-scale effort has fallen short of helping those other than the wealthier visitors and workers traveling between Midtown and downtown. Again, the resources and political structure appear to be unevenly devoted to those with power, leaving others behind.
So Maya, describe how the attitude of Detroit has changed throughout your lifetime.
Okay, so there was a time when I was younger and most of my peers had this fear of hanging out in Detroit, yet I did not since I had grown up in the city. And then as I went through high school, Detroit became this cool, hip place to hang out in. And it was just funny to me because these people that I had been in school with, these people that I had grew up around, they had this fear at one point, and then Detroit was just the place to be at another.
So do you think gentrification is a positive thing or a negative thing for Detroit?
I definitely think there's a positive and negative side. Positive being that more revenue is coming into the city, there's more visitors, there's more jobs, but the building of these businesses have torn apart communities, the people who lived in Detroit their entire lives for generations past and present.
From roads to parks, railways to bridges, new projects in these two massive urban cities continue. As we have seen, such projects can benefit certain groups of people and repress others, and this can happen both intentionally and unintentionally. In both societies, the division between the haves and have-nots continues to cause unrest. There's a strong correlation between who benefits from infrastructure and who holds power in these societies. How these divisions resolve still remains to be seen, and will likely continue to be the forefront of issues facing both Detroit and Paris in the coming years.
I met her in the backseat of a taxi, hey, on my way to the club. Hey, I met her in the backseat of a taxi, hey, on my way to the club.